I never thought monsters could come in such familiar shapes. When I look back now, I realize the signs were there from the very beginning, the lingering glances, the sharp tone that bled through even the sweetest words, the way my daughter, Rachel, could twist a conversation so that I walked away feeling like I had done something wrong when all I'd done was love her. But in those days, I was blind. Or maybe I wanted to be blind. Mothers aren't supposed to think of their children as predators. We're supposed to believe they're our greatest treasures. I thought Rachel was mine. I was 62 when all of this began, already a widow for 7 years. My hair gone white at the temples, though I still had the energy to run the estate my late husband left behind. I was comfortable, wealthy by most standards, but I wasn't careless. I knew what it had taken him and me, beside him, to build this life. Oil, money, land investments, diversified stocks. And I had guarded it all the way a soldier guards the last stronghold in a war. Not for myself, I already had more than I needed, but for Rachel. She was my only child, bright, ambitious, and, as I thought back then, fiercely loyal. We had endured grief together after her father's death, leaned on one another in the quiet of those hollow nights. I thought it bound us. But in truth, grief does not always bind. Sometimes it loosens ties and lets darker forces slip in. When she returned home after university, Rachel seemed determined to prove herself. She told me she wanted to help manage the estate to carry her father's legacy forward. I wanted nothing more than to see her thrive, so I opened the doors of the office to her. I gave her access to files, accounts, meetings. I told myself it was her right, her inheritance. What I didn't realize was that I had also given her weapons. The first signs of trouble came in whispers. A landscaper who had worked for me 20 years stopped me one afternoon to ask why Rachel had halved his pay. When I confronted her, she smiled in that practiced way of hers, tilting her head just so. "Oh, Mother, he was overbilling us. I saved you thousands. You should thank me." And I did. I actually thanked her, because I wanted to believe she was protecting me. But later, I noticed the same thing with a supplier, then with one of the accountants. Rachel was trimming costs, yes, but always in a way that shifted loyalty from them to her. She was building her own little empire within mine. And I was too enamored with her initiative to see it, looking back. I think the first true crack in our bond came one night in the dining room. I had made a simple roast chicken, one of Rachel's childhood favorites. We sat across from each other at the long mahogany table that had once seated her father at its head. She sipped her wine and set down her glass with a little sigh. "Mother," she said, "don't you think it's time you updated your will?" The words froze me. I laughed lightly, trying to brush it off. "Well, dear, I don't plan on dying just yet." Her eyes lingered on mine, unblinking. "Of course not. But things happen. You should think about protecting what's ours." Ours, the word slid under my skin. I told myself she was being practical. That's what I wanted to believe. But the way she said it, flat, calculated, made me feel like she was rehearsing for something. Weeks passed. Rachel grew bolder. She began calling the lawyers without me, arranging meetings, presenting me with documents I barely had time to read. When I hesitated, she leaned on me. "Mother, you're tired. You've done enough. Let me handle it." Father would have wanted it this way. That line, "Father would have wanted it," was her sharpest knife. She wielded it often, and I, foolish as I was, let her. Because what mother wants to believe her daughter is capable of betrayal? It wasn't until I overheard a phone call that the first real dread took root in me. I had walked into the hall one afternoon and heard Rachel in the study, her voice hushed but urgent. "She's almost there. Just a little more time." "Yes, I'll make sure she signs." I stood frozen, my hand pressed to the wall. Who was she speaking to? Who was she? My heart told me the answer, but my mind refused it. I made noise with the door to announce myself, and when Rachel turned, her face was all innocence. "Mother, just discussing a charity event with Victoria." Victoria was her closest friend, a sharp young woman with a smile that never reached her eyes. I wanted to press her, but I didn't. I told myself it wasn't my place to pry into her private calls. but I knew deep down that something was shifting. Over the next months, Rachel's grip tightened. She began making decisions in my name, telling staff I had approved things I'd never even heard of. When I confronted her, she turned it back on me. "Mother, don't you remember? We talked about this last week." She said it so convincingly that I began to question myself. Had I forgotten? Was I slipping? That was the cruelest trick of all. She made me doubt my own memory, my own mind. Gaslighting, they call it now. Back then, I just thought I was aging. It all came to a head the night of the gala. I hadn't wanted to go, but Rachel insisted. She bought me a new dress, arranged the car, even hired a stylist. "You'll look radiant," she said, "just like old times." For a moment, I let myself believe she wanted to celebrate me. But when we arrived, I realized the gala wasn't about me at all. It was about Rachel. She worked the room like a politician, introducing herself as the new face of the Prince's state, the one carrying her father's legacy forward. When people congratulated me, it was only in passing, as though I were a relic. Rachel had made herself the centerpiece, and I was the backdrop. I should have confronted her that night, should have taken back control. But instead, I smiled through clenched teeth and let the evening pass. Because part of me still loved her too much to believe she was capable of turning me into a shadow. I didn't know then how far she was willing to go. I didn't know how much darker the road would become, but I would learn. And when I did, I would discover that sometimes the monsters we fear most aren't strangers at all. They're the ones we raised. The weeks after the gala stretched into a haze of unease. Outwardly, life moved along as it always had. The estate ran, the staff bustled, my investments ticked along. But beneath the surface, something was shifting. Rachel was moving her pieces. And I, foolishly, was letting her. One morning I found myself staring at the ledgers spread across my desk. The numbers no longer lined up the way I remembered them. I was meticulous with accounts. I had balanced books by hand in the days before software. But now deposits and withdrawals blurred together, and I couldn't tell if it was my eyes or Rachel's revisions. When I asked her about a missing transfer, she gave me that look, sweet, patient, just shy of patronizing. "Oh, Mother, I explained that to you. Twice, actually. You must have forgotten again." Her voice dripped with compassion, but her eyes flashed with something else. Triumph. That night, I sat awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing her words echo in my mind. "You must have forgotten again." Was I? My doctor said my memory was sharp for my age, yet doubt gnawed at me. That was Rachel's trick. She planted little seeds of uncertainty until I watered them myself. The housekeeper, Margaret, noticed my unease. She'd worked for me since Rachel was a child, and she had a blunt tongue sharpened by years of loyalty. One afternoon, as she brought tea, she leaned close and whispered, "Mrs. Eleanor, you watch your daughter. She's too hungry for a girl who's already had everything." I brushed her off, though her words struck me harder than I admitted. "Margaret, Rachel only wants to help." She shook her head and pressed the tray into my hands. Helping doesn't usually look like pushing the hand that fed you off the table. I wanted to be angry with her, but I couldn't. Deep down, I feared she was right. It was around then that Rachel introduced me to Jonathan Hale. A lawyer, she claimed, was far more modern than the family's longtime counsel. Mr. Lewis, Jonathan, was young, polished, with an easy smile that could charm anyone into signing away their life. He wore sleek suits and carried a leather folio like a badge of sophistication. Mother, Rachel said, practically glowing. Jonathan specializes in estate planning. He's agreed to review everything to ensure your legacy is protected. I bristled. What about Mr. Lewis? He's been with us for decades. Rachel's smile thinned. Mr. Lewis is outdated. This is a new era, Mother. You need someone who understands today's world. I didn't like the way Jonathan's eyes roamed the study, as if cataloging every piece of art, every antique vase, each one a future asset to be divided. He shook my hand firmly, but his grip lingered a beat too long, like a test. We sat for an hour, Rachel steering the conversation, Jonathan nodding approvingly at her every word. I barely spoke. Every time I opened my mouth, Rachel cut in, smoothing over my confusion. She painted me as fragile, tired, overwhelmed, when I knew I was still sharp. I could feel the narrative slipping from my grasp, being rewritten before my eyes. After Jonathan left, I tried to confront her. "Rachel, I don't like the way he looks at me, at us." "He's not." Her smile cut me off. "Mother, please, don't embarrass yourself. Jonathan is brilliant. You're lucky to have him. Trust me, this is for your own good." Her tone carried the finality of a slammed door. It was the first time I realized my voice in this house was no longer the loudest. Days bled into weeks, each one tightening Rachel's control. She began screening my phone calls, claiming she didn't want me bothered by nonsense. Old friends complained they couldn't reach me. When I asked why, Rachel said they must have forgotten my number. She positioned herself as my shield while isolating me piece by piece. I remember one night in particular. I had gone to the parlor for a book and found her in the study, back to me, speaking urgently into the phone. Her voice was low, sharp, nothing like the honey she dripped in my presence. "Yes, she's signing soon. Don't worry. Once the transfer's complete, it's ours. Ours." That word again. She turned and spotted me before I could retreat. Her face changed instantly, the predator replaced by the dutiful daughter. "Mother, I was just confirming the charity details with Victoria. You remember the fundraiser for the orphanage?" Her lies came so easily, and I nodded, pretending I believed her, because I was beginning to understand the danger of showing my suspicion. From that night on, I started writing things down. Conversations, dates, small details. I kept a journal hidden beneath the floorboard in my closet, scrawling notes by candlelight when the house was silent. I knew if Rachel found it, she'd call it evidence of paranoia. But I needed proof for myself, nothing else, that my mind was still intact. The turning point came with the birthday dinner. Rachel had arranged it all, inviting a dozen guests, business partners. Jonathan the lawyer, even Victoria, that friend of hers I never quite trusted. She told me it was to celebrate me. But I quickly saw it was a showcase for her. Midway through the meal, Jonathan stood and clinked his glass. "I'd like to propose a toast," he said, flashing that perfect smile. "To Rachel, who has proven herself not only a capable daughter but a remarkable steward of her family's legacy." The room applauded. I sat frozen, my fork halfway to my mouth. Not one word about me. Not one acknowledgement of the decades I had spent building what Rachel now claimed as her own. When the applause died, Rachel placed a hand over mine. "Mother," she said sweetly, "why don't you say a few words?" The room turned to me. I looked at their expectant faces, at Jonathan's smug grin, at Rachel's eyes glittering with victory, and I said nothing. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I realized my words no longer mattered to them. Rachel had rewritten the story so thoroughly that I was a supporting character in my own life. Later that night, alone in my room, I cried. Not out of weakness, but out of rage. Because for the first time, I understood the truth. My daughter wasn't helping me. She wasn't protecting me, she was erasing me. And if I didn't act soon, she would succeed. I wish I could tell you that after that birthday dinner, I found the strength to stand my ground, to confront Rachel openly and reclaim what was mine. But the truth is uglier. I withdrew. I let her win small battles because I feared what might happen if I openly declared war. That is how predators gain power, not in a single strike, but in 1,000 little cuts. Rachel used my silence as fuel. With every concession I made, she grew bolder. The first sign came in subtle gestures. She began sitting at the head of the dining table, my seat, for nearly 40 years. At first, she claimed it was just for convenience, because she needed to dash off after meals to handle calls or check on the children. But soon it was unspoken law. Guests addressed her first. The staff looked to her for decisions. Then came the papers. One gray afternoon, Jonathan arrived with a leather case, his smile as polished as ever. "Just a few small documents, Mrs. Eleanor," he said, laying them neatly on my desk. "Nothing to trouble yourself over. Standard updates." Rachel hovered at his side, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. Mother, it's just to streamline things. You don't want to be buried under tedious signatures, do you? Let me help take care of it. I picked up the pen, my fingers trembling. My instinct screamed that these were not small documents. The words blurred on the page: trusts, transfers, powers of attorney. Jonathan explained each clause in quick, breezy tones, his voice a lullaby of deception. I stalled. I'll need Mr. Lewis to review these. Rachel's smile froze, then cracked just enough to reveal the steel beneath. Mother, I told you Mr. Lewis is outdated. You don't need his approval anymore. You have me. The room went silent. Her words echoed with a finality that chilled me. You have me, not as comfort. As possession. I set the pen down. Then I'll read them myself before signing. Her nails dug ever so slightly into my shoulder. Of course, she said sweetly, but I saw the fury in her eyes. That night, I hid the documents in my room, beneath the false bottom of my jewelry case. I read them by candlelight just as I read my journals. And though I could not untangle every line of legal jargon, I understood enough. Rachel was maneuvering to take full control of my estate, to reduce me to a figurehead. I tore the pages of my journal that night with the ferocity of my writing. She is not my daughter anymore. She is a vulture in my home, but fear bound me still. If I exposed my suspicion too early, she would strike harder, faster. I needed a plan. It was Margaret who gave me the first glimmer of hope. She came to my room late one evening, her eyes darting to the hall before closing the door. She placed a bundle of envelopes on my desk. These were delivered weeks ago, ma'am. Miss Rachel intercepted them. I kept them hidden. My hands shook as I opened them. Letters from old friends, from business associates, even from charities I had long supported. They all carried the same tone: concern, confusion, disappointment. Why had I ignored them? Why had I failed to respond? I realized then how far Rachel's isolation campaign had gone. She wasn't just controlling me. She was cutting me out of the world. Margaret leaned close, her voice a whisper. You're not crazy, Mrs. Eleanor? She's weaving a net around you. But nets can be cut. For the first time in weeks, I felt less alone. The next day, I tested Rachel. I mentioned casually that I might visit an old friend in the city just for a luncheon. Her reaction was swift, sharp. Oh, Mother, that's not safe. The city is chaotic, and you'd only exhaust yourself. Besides, you have me. You don't need anyone else. That phrase again. You have me. I smiled politely, but inside I burned. She was afraid of me reaching beyond her grip. That meant I still had power. I began to act quietly. At night, when the house was silent, I practiced hiding things. Journals and hollowed-out books, small amounts of cash in the lining of coats, keys in teacups that no one touched. I was no longer just a mother fighting her daughter. I was a prisoner plotting escape. But Rachel grew bolder too. One evening, as we sat in the parlor, she poured me tea. I watched her hands carefully. She stirred mine with a spoon she hadn't used for her own. A faint bitterness touched my tongue when I sipped. I set the cup down. It tastes different tonight. She smiled without meeting my eyes. Nonsense, Mother. Perhaps your taste buds are changing. It happens with age. My stomach churned not from the tea, but from the realization. She wanted me doubting my body as much as my mind. And yet, I didn't confront her. Not then. I had to be smarter. The walls of the house began to feel alive with secrets. Rachel whispered into phones. Jonathan made more visits. Victoria hovered around like a crow circling prey. I caught fragments of conversations. The sooner, the better. She won't resist. Signatures in place, but I resisted. In silence, in shadows. In ink pressed so hard into my journals that the words tore through the paper. And then came the blow I feared most. One morning, Rachel breezed into my room with papers in hand. Jonathan trailing behind her like a shadow. Mother, we're going to the notary today, she said cheerfully. Just some standard confirmations. I asked what they were. She explained quickly, dismissively, a rehearsed litany of reassurances. My eyes caught one phrase: durable power of attorney. I froze. That was no small confirmation. That was surrender. I looked at Rachel, at the daughter I had raised, the girl I had once cradled in my arms, and I saw nothing of her left. Only ambition. Only hunger. I forced a smile. Of course, darling. But not today. I'm feeling rather faint. Her eyes narrowed. She didn't believe me. But she didn't push yet that evening. I wrote the words that would become the heartbeat of my resistance. She thinks I am weak. She thinks I am blind. She does not know I am watching. She does not know I am waiting. She does not know a mother's fury grows quiet before it explodes. And I swore that before Rachel could erase me, I would turn the story against her. I think the hardest part of betrayal is not the act itself, but the silence afterward. That space between what they did and what you allow yourself to admit. For weeks, I carried the weight of Rachel's schemes in my chest, smiling through dinners, nodding at her lies, pretending I didn't see Jonathan lurking like a vulture in my hallways. But I saw everything. The storm gathered slowly. It began with Rachel controlling my letters, then my meetings, then my finances. Now she was reaching for the final prize, legal dominion over my life. She wanted the ink of my name under her control. And yet, as much as she pressed, I played weak. I let my hand tremble when I held a pen. I let my voice quiver when I asked questions. I let her believe her poison was working, because the more convinced she was of my frailty, the more reckless she would become. Margaret, bless her soul, became my shadow. She slipped messages past Rachel's watchful eye, smuggled letters from my safe box, even drove discreetly to meet with Mr. Lewis, my old attorney, who Rachel thought she had disposed of. Lewis was furious when he learned of Rachel's games. She's laying the groundwork for a guardianship, Eleanor, he told me. If she succeeds, you'll be declared unfit. And she'll run your estate in your name? His words chilled me, but they also sharpened my resolve. I had to move carefully. If I lashed out too soon, Rachel would twist the narrative. The cruel daughter protecting her confused mother. No, I needed proof. Something undeniable. So I began to record. Margaret found me a small voice recorder, tucked neatly into a box of sewing supplies. I hid it beneath the lace table runner in the parlor, where Rachel so often cornered me for her soft-voiced threats. And I waited. The first capture was almost too perfect. Rachel leaned close as Jonathan adjusted papers at the coffee table. "Mother," she said sweetly, "if you just sign these, no one has to know how difficult you've become. Imagine the embarrassment if people learned you couldn't even manage your own affairs." Jonathan chuckled lowly. "Better for everyone if this is quiet." I smiled at her, weak as a lamb, while the machine beneath the lace drank in every poisonous word. That night, I replayed it in secret, her voice dripping with false affection. Jonathan's arrogance proof. Real proof. My heart pounded with triumph. But I didn't stop there. I collected more. Each time she slipped, each time her mask cracked, I had the recorder waiting. Rachel, meanwhile, wove her net tighter. She summoned Victoria, my niece, to assist with the transition. Victoria had always adored Rachel more than me. She admired her charm, her confidence. Now she arrived in sharp suits, heels clicking on my hardwood floors, speaking to me as if I were a client being closed. Not a woman who had raised her on summer holidays, Eleanor. She said one evening, "This will all be easier if you cooperate. Rachel is only trying to protect you. Don't fight her. It's unbecoming." Unbecoming. As though dignity was a costume I could shed. I let them believe their words landed. But in my journal, I wrote the truth. The monster thinks she has one. But even monsters can be trapped in their own cages. Then came the garden incident. I was sitting by the fountain, reading, when Rachel approached. Her voice was syrupy, but her eyes were sharp. "You've been restless lately, Mother? Wandering at night, forgetting things." She tilted her head, studying me like a specimen. "Perhaps we should consider professional care. A clinic? Maybe. Somewhere safe." My blood turned cold. She wanted me institutionalized. Out of the house. Out of her way, but I feigned confusion, blinking up at her. "Perhaps you're right, dear. I do feel awfully tired." She smiled, satisfied. That night, I packed a small satchel of journals, recordings, cash Margaret had smuggled, and one silver key. The key to the old safe in my husband's study? Rachel thought it was empty. She had raided it long ago. But what she didn't know was that my husband, careful as ever, had a hidden compartment. In it lay the original deeds to several properties and a letter of intent naming me sole trustee of a charitable fund worth millions. Rachel had no claim over those. None. As I held those documents, I felt my husband's presence again. He had always told me, "Eleanor, power isn't in money. It's in foresight." And I realized then that foresight was the one thing Rachel lacked. She lived for the immediate kill, never the long hunt. So I laid the bait. I told her, deliberately within earshot of Jonathan, that I was considering rewriting my will, that I might leave more to charity, less to family. Her fury was immediate. She slammed my bedroom door that night, her voice trembling with rage. "You wouldn't dare. After everything I've done for you." I sat calmly watching her unravel. "Done for me or taken from me?" I asked softly. Her eyes flared. "You'll regret this." The recorder hidden beneath my shawl caught every word. The tension in the house reached fever pitch. Meals were eaten in brittle silence, broken only by Rachel's barbed remarks and Jonathan's oily reassurances. Victoria lingered constantly, pretending to care. But I saw the greed in her eyes. And yet, for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I was angry. Righteously, silently angry, because I knew the truth. Rachel wasn't protecting me. She wasn't even destroying me. She was destroying herself. Every lie, every threat. Every slip into cruelty was another brick in the wall I was building around her. Margaret asked me one night if I was sure. "She's your daughter, ma'am. Are you certain you want to bring her down?" I stared at the flame of the candle between us. "Margaret, she stopped being my daughter the moment she wished me erased. She is not a child anymore. She is a monster. And monsters don't stop until someone stops them." And so I sharpened my blade in silence, waiting for the moment to strike. The strike came sooner than I expected. Rachel burst into my study one morning, Jonathan and Victoria at her heels, papers in hand. Her voice rang out triumphant. "It's done. We've scheduled the court hearing. You'll be declared incompetent next month. After that, everything is in my hands." I felt my chest tighten, but I forced calm. I even smiled. "Next month, then?" I said softly. She blinked, suspicious. "You don't seem surprised?" I leaned back in my chair, my hands folded over the recorder hidden beneath my robe. "Oh, darling, you'd be surprised what I've been preparing." The flicker of doubt in her eyes was the sweetest thing I'd seen in months. And in that moment, I knew the war was no longer hers. It was mine. The weeks between Rachel's announcement and the court hearing were some of the longest of my life. Every morning I awoke with the same thought, just a little longer. Hold your mask in place. Let her believe she's won. She believed it. Oh, how she believed it. Rachel strutted through my house as though it were already hers. Rearranging furniture, dictating to staff, talking to contractors about renovations. She even had the audacity to plan a garden party, celebrate the new era of the Prince estate. I watched it all from the shadows, an old woman in her armchair. But inside, I was a soldier, sharpening my blade. Margaret remained my steadfast ally, ferrying evidence to Lewis and helping me prepare my final blow. Each recording, each signature Rachel tried to force, each slip of venom from her lips, it all became part of a growing arsenal. The day of the garden party arrived. Rachel had invited half the town, eager to showcase her victory before it was even secured. Guests milled about in the sunshine, sipping champagne while Rachel paraded me like a prize cow. Mother's health is failing. As you can see, she told Mrs. Whitmore from the church committee loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. I'm stepping up to handle things. It's what family does. I smiled faintly, nodding as though grateful, while my insides burned. But when she turned away, I whispered to Margaret. They'll see the truth soon enough. That night, in the quiet after the party, I made my choice. Enough waiting. The time had come to expose her. The hearing was set for the following Tuesday. Rachel arrived in a crisp navy suit, Jonathan at her side. Victoria clutching her briefcase like a young attorney ready to pounce. They looked like conquerors. I arrived on Marcus's arm. Lewis's young associate, sharp-eyed and discreet. My appearance shocked them. They expected me frail, confused. Instead, I walked with steady steps, my hair pinned neatly. My pearl earrings gleaming. Judge Harris, a stern man with little patience for theatrics, presided. Rachel's lawyer wasted no time, Your Honor. You present compelling evidence that Mrs. Eleanor Carter is no longer capable of managing her personal or financial affairs. Her erratic behavior, her forgetfulness, her susceptibility to manipulation. I almost laughed. Susceptibility to manipulation. If only he knew. Rachel sat smugly, her hand resting possessively on Jonathan's arm. She looked at me with pity, as though this was already done. Then Lewis rose. Calm, deliberate. Your Honor, he began, before we address the petition, I asked permission to play a series of recordings. They concern the petitioner's conduct in relation to my client. Rachel stiffened. What recordings? She hissed. My heart pounded as Lewis's pressed play. Rachel's voice filled the courtroom. If you just sign these, no one has to know how. Difficult you've become. Imagine the embarrassment if people learned you couldn't even manage your own affairs. Gasps rippled through the room. Jonathan's voice followed. Better for everyone if this is quiet. Rachel surged to her feet. That's out of context. But Lewis pressed on, cueing the next clip. Rachel's fury after I'd mentioned rewriting my will. You'll regret this then. The garden threat. Perhaps we should consider professional care. A clinic, maybe? Somewhere safe. By the time the final recording ended, the room was dead silent. Judge Harris leaned forward. Miss Carter, do you deny these are your words? Rachel stammered, her poise crumbling. I was just concerned for her. She twists things. Jonathan tried to interject, but Lewis cut him off with documents. Deeds, letters, bank statements showing Jonathan had already siphoned funds with Rachel's authorization. The judge's expression hardened. It appears the only party exhibiting questionable judgment here is the petitioner. Rachel's face drained of color, and then the coup de grace. Lewis handed over a notarized letter from my late husband, unearthed from the hidden compartment. It named me sole trustee of a fund beyond Rachel's reach, affirming my capacity to manage affairs even in difficulty. I watched Rachel's hands tremble as her empire of lies collapsed. When the gavel came down, the petition was denied with prejudice. Not only that, Judge Harris ordered an investigation into Rachel and Jonathan's conduct, citing fraud and undue influence. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Rachel turned on me, her eyes wild. You planned this. You tricked me. I met her gaze, steady at last. No, Rachel, you revealed yourself. I only let the world listen. Security escorted her out when she began to shout. Jonathan slunk behind her, pale and sweating. Victoria lingered, eyes wide with horror, realizing her loyalties had been chained to a sinking ship. The weeks that followed were chaos. The investigation opened doors Rachel had prayed would stay locked. Her accounts were seized, her partnerships exposed. Jonathan was indicted on fraud charges. Rachel faced perjury and attempted exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The newspapers that once printed her smiling face now called her the scheming daughter. As for me, I found peace again. Real peace. The estate was mine, but more importantly, my dignity was intact. One evening, sitting by the fire, Margaret asked me if I felt sorrow. She was your daughter. After all, I stared at the flames, remembering the girl Rachel once was. The child who clutched my hand in thunderstorms, tweeved, who begged me to sing lullabies at night. But that child had died long ago, smothered by greed and ambition. What remained was not my daughter, but a monster wearing her face, And so I answered Margaret truthfully, "No, I feel nothing but relief. In hindsight, I see the lesson clearly. Monsters don't always lurk in the dark. Sometimes they grow in your own home, in the children you love. And sometimes the greatest act of survival is refusing to let their hunger consume you. So I tell this story not for sympathy, but as a warning. If you ever find yourself doubting the cruelty of someone you thought you knew, don't ignore it. Trust your instincts. Protect yourself because monsters are real. And sometimes they call you mother.